What's up, my wizards? Dev, SBMTG, we like magic, all that stuff, and today we are going to continue with our analysis of this big Dominaria leak from last week. Today we've hit our last color, too. This is green, but don't let that make you think that we're done. We've actually got one more to do after this, all the golden artifacts. It's probably going to be a pretty long one, and if you've missed any videos up till now, I'll put all of the other four colors as links in the description so you can catch up if you haven't done that yet. But I want to go ahead and get on with green because in terms of constructed playable cards, I actually think green has a ton of potential. So I want to go ahead and start talking about it, beginning with Kamal's Druidic Vow. This is 2 green and X for a legendary sorcery. Look at the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of lands and or legendary permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest into your graveyard. There's some cool stuff about this that jumps out at me right at first glance. First of all, note that it's legendary permanent cards that this can get. That means stuff other than creatures. You get sagas with this. You get planeswalkers. That's pretty cool. You can get some artifacts. So that's nice. And it puts any land into play, so if you hit a bunch of basics or something, they don't have to be like legendary lands. Just any old land it throws right into play, which is cool because you could tap out for it for X equals 3 or 4 and then end up not tapped out. You need a couple lands off of that. That'd be pretty cool. Although I do think that the legendary restriction on this is a little bit harsher than some of the others. It won't be too hard to control a legendary permanent in green, or if you're playing like a 2 or 3 color deck. It shouldn't be super hard. But the stuff I want to do with this involves, some turn like 3 or 4 plays. It's going to be kind of tough to have a legend in play for. Although there is an Elves deck shaping up that I think could play this to great effect. So there's that. But other than that, I'm not really sure what to do with this in Standard right now, but there probably are some really good options, and there may be a deck built around this. Although it's sort of, in an alarming way, reminds me of Uncage the Menagerie. It's not quite Uncage the Menagerie at all, but it reminds me of that, and it's a card that I personally like, but it didn't see any play. And you can play that anytime you want. You don't have to have a legendary in play to play Uncage, and it saw no play whatsoever. So I'm not super sold on this, but I think that the right build exists to exploit it, and I do like that you can just ramp into lands with this. That also seems like a cool application, but I really don't like having to have a legendary in play. I think that's going to be a bigger restriction than we're initially giving it credit for. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. If there's any crazy stuff you can think of with Druidic Vow, let me know down there, because I've got a feeling about it. Like if you can play it for 3 mana where X equals 1, then you've got just any land. Hitting any land would be great. It's just a 3 mana ramp spell, which isn't the best thing ever, but it's not terrible either. But we've also got a Via Pashiri in Standard to sort of help with the success rate of an X equals 1 Vow. So that would be kind of cool. But all in all, I'm not seeing that it'd be incredible. I guess X for 3 in this color is okay, because you already have Ronus and Rishkar in Standard, and there's a couple of green. Well, yeah, there's at least one more green legend that we'll cover that I think this would be pretty cool with. So there's some cool stuff going on here, but if you've got any really crazy interactions to talk about, let us know down there in the comments. I'm going to move on to what is, if not the most impactful card in green, it might actually be the most impactful card in the entire set, and it's a common. And it's a reprint, and it's Llanowar Elves, which is back, which you've probably heard already. I'd say Llanowar Elves has gotten more hype than any single card in the entire set, but that's because you can legitimately say this card is going to be the most impactful Standard card in the set, just right off the rip. This really affects the way we think about Standard Magic. For a long time, they didn't want to give us Llanowar Elves in Standard. We didn't think they were going to do it this time, but they went ahead and did it. There's not. The good thing is, though, there are controls to Llanowar Elves right now. There's Walking Ballista, Fanatical Firebrand, Fatal Push, Shock, Magma Spray, Harness Lightning you can play, and it leaves over 2 energy. There's plenty of stuff you can do against Llanowar Elves, and there's even more in this set. What was it? Fungal Infection in the black cards. That's a great way to get rid of a Llanowar Elves and actually be up on board presence for just 1 mana. And even the First Eruption, we looked at this yesterday. They get a little bit of value out of their Llanowar Elves. They get their 3-drop on turn 2, but you still get to turn the tables. You play First Eruption, you kill the Llanowar Elves, then turn 2, you get some ramp to help catch up to whatever they did. So I think that there are enough controls, and there are even more than that in this format, for Llanowar Elves to actually exist and be fair. And there's also the fact that there's just not a ton of amazing 3-drops to ramp into. We'll see a couple in this review. There are good Llanowar Elf ramp targets on turn 2 in this set. But as far as standard as the whole goes, you know, there's like Deathgorge Scavenger, Pia Nalar, Champion of Wits. I guess Whirler Virtuoso barely counts, but there's just really not a whole lot of options for just amazing 3-drops. Rishkar, probably one of the better ones that you want to ramp into, because that's actually, Rishkar is probably the best one that exists right now. But, you know, there's just not a whole lot of broken 3-mana plays, but there's some really good stuff in the set that we'll get to as we move on. And I might as well go ahead and tell you about one. Here's Steel Leaf Champion, another card that people are wigging out about. This is 3 mana, 3 green for a 5/4 Elf Knight, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. There honestly doesn't have to be text on this card, but for it to be decent. But it's, I mean, you can tell it's pretty, the text makes it way better because it's not going to be able to be blocked by half the stuff that's being played around it at that point in the game. That's really, really good if you play it early. And obviously, Llanowar Elves gets us into play on turn 2, and an early champion is crazy considering there's not much early in the game that they can do about this without it eating a creature, you know, when it attacks, or soaking up a removal spell on like turn 4, because before that there's not much else. You know, Fatal Push has to be revolted. Shock and Magma Spray don't even touch it. Lightning Strike, a Braid, they don't kill it. Cut kills it. But there's not really much else. Seal Away from this set is probably going to be a really relevant piece of removal against this. Same thing with Baffling End for that matter. But I just think that this looks like a fantastic new creature that once, if you get it down on turn 2, honestly, forget that. If you get it down on curve on turn 3, this is going to be really problematic for a lot of decks to do something about in Standard. It's got a relevant creature type too for some decks, so that's important. I like so much about this. I think it's a lot better than like Ronus's Last Stand for what it's worth. You know, and along with Llanowar Elf, it's going to be one of the most feared turn 1 and 2 curves in Standard, I would say. I mean, there's always the chance that this sees absolutely no play because its casting cost is extremely restrictive. But Mono Red Stompy was Mono Green Stompy, what am I talking about? Mono Green Stompy was already coming along, and cards like Llanowar Elves in this made the deck look very real and honestly scary. So I'm looking forward to Champion doing something in Standard. It looks too good and too hard to remove in the early game not to be a real card. So I'm there. I think it's there, is all I'm saying. But I'm going to go ahead and move on, because you guys know that card's crazy. That card has ridiculous stats for its casting cost and good text too. So yeah, the card's good. Not too much else you can say about it. So I'll move on to Gia's Blessing, another reprint. This is actually kind of cool that we got this back. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from his or her graveyard into his or her library, and then you draw a card. When it's put into your graveyard from your library, you shuffle your graveyard into your library. That's not going to happen too often in this format. There are ways you can definitely engineer it. You know, you have Fraying Sanity and stuff. There's plenty of other things. Minister of Inquiries, and even more for that matter. But the first thing I can think of for this is a way of dealing with the Scarab God and Rekindling Phoenix and a couple of other things, you know, Embalm and Eternalized creatures. But for the most part, Rekindling Phoenix and Scarab God are the 2 big ones that come to mind. Just shuffle them back into their library. And you're not done with them, but you're done with them a lot sooner, or for a lot longer, and that's pretty sweet. So I like that. Also, cantrips, that's always sweet. So this could be a decent sideboard piece, although I would imagine you'd probably just rather exile them cleanly and be done with problematic creatures. But, you know, possibly if you either don't have that option or you want a second option, Gia's Blessing could be in your board. And combo decks have usually enjoyed this in the past. I haven't so far thought of or read any really significant game-breaking interactions in Standard with a Gia's Blessing in a combo deck, but I'm sure that there's something we can brew up either in the here and now or a little bit further down the road when we have a more complete Standard. So we'll see. I think Gia's Blessing will do something because Gia's Blessing tends to do something. So we'll move on to Verdant Force here. It's back. Verdant Force is bad. The original Timmy card, actually the original Timmy card is Force of Nature, but Verdant Force pulls up a close second. It's 8 mana, 5 and 3 green for a 7/7 elemental. During each player's upkeep, put a Saproling token into play. Treat this token as a 1/1 green creature. So we'll get this and Tindershoot Dryad in the same format. Seems like a formidable team to be able to double up on creatures that can do that. And just like Tindershoot, this is the OG Tindershoot Dryad. You know, it can put a creature into play every upkeep. Not just your own, but during each player's upkeep. It's pretty sweet. You get a ton of power out of this relatively quickly. But will it see play in Standard? I don't know, man. It costs an awful lot of mana. And if we're paying that much mana, there's probably better stuff we can be doing. But Verdant Force was a popular reanimation target back in the day. Again, I think we have better reanimation targets in this set, let alone the upcoming Standard, but in this set. So I'm just not sure if Verdant Force is destined to be the best card in Standard or anything, but we're all very happy that it's back, and I can't wait to see the new art on this. I would imagine there's going to be new art, so that's probably going to be pretty hype when it's all said and done. And I guess if you're having a problem getting Verdant Forces from Tempest or whatever, you now have a chance to open them in packs if you really want them for your commander deck or whatever. So I'm just happy it's back. It makes my heart happy. It gives me nostalgic feels, and that's all it's for. I don't care if it ever sees a day of play in Standard. I'm just happy that it's here. So yay, Verdant Force. But here's another blast from the past, and it's actually the last reprint from the leaks, or at least in green. So here's Thorn Elemental right here. Good to have it back too. It's 7 mana, 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 elemental, and it may deal its combat damage to defending players as though it weren't blocked. And that's so cool. It's always been an awesome ability. And back in '99, when we were just like, we pooled all of our allowance together, me and a couple of buddies, and we just sat around, opened a couple of booster boxes of Destiny, and this is one of the cards that I really wanted to open. I was super excited about Thorn Elemental. My love for it didn't pan out over time. This is one of those lesson cards, because you're really excited about it. You finally get it down on the board, and this is not as good as you thought it was. It sits in your hand most of the game. And then when it finally gets out, they have a whole turn to remove it, and even if they don't, it's just not as good as you want it to be. So, I mean, fair warning about Thorn Elemental. This is another, prime Timmy card. This is Timmy bait, but it's not going to do anything. It's just a cool card that people that played 15 years ago are going to open and be like, oh, Thorn Elemental's back, and the new art's probably going to be banging. So I like that Thorn Elemental's here, but I've been burned. I've been burned by Thorn Elemental before, so I'm excited it's back, but I don't see it doing a whole heck of a lot. And yeah, but before I move on, there's always the pipe dream of putting a bunch of auras and stuff on it, and then being able to essentially fling it without having to play fling. So that is a dream, but it usually is. It's just a dream. So don't get too excited. But we'll move on to new stuff here. Here's Baloth Gorger. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 beast with kicker 4. And if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. As far as I'm concerned, next, this is probably great in limited, especially sealed, where games are going to go fairly long. And they'll go long in draft too, but even longer in sealed. And a 4 mana 4/4 that's a pretty decent body by itself. But if you do have the mana to pump into it later on in the game, getting a 7/7 is sometimes game ending. So I like how flexible this is in the limited environment and nowhere else. But it does look like, pun intended, a beast in that limited. So 4 mana 4/4, 8 mana 7/7. Either way, if you got the mana for it, you'll do it in sealed. So I like it. But we'll move on here to Song of Freyalise. This is 2 mana. I really like this card, actually. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a Saga. When it comes into play, put the first lore counter on it, and until your next turn, creatures you control gain tap out of mana of any color to your mana pool. Second turn, it gets another lore counter, and that happens again. Until your next turn, creatures you control gain tapped out of mana of any color. They all become Birds of Paradise. And then third lore counter, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. So it's essentially a Cryptolith Rite for 2 turns. And then it gives a relatively big boost, or at least a permanent boost. That's nothing to sneeze at. To all of those dudes you were able to play. And there's cool stuff you can do, man. Turn 1, Llanowar Elves or something, and then turn 2, Song of Freyalise with the 2 lands you have. And then tap your Llanowar Elves for another creature. And then next turn you can just go off, tap the 2 creatures you've already played for more creatures. And then the next turn it's in play, you'll sack it, yeah, but all those little dudes you played will get a little bit bigger, and you'll get a pretty good combat step out of them where they actually stay up to block next turn. So this is cool. I think this is sweet. If you can get a really big board going on turn 3, then your turn 4 attack step will be really cool. And even if you don't decide to attack, you're still giving a permanent bonus to all of your creatures. And honestly, with Cryptolith Right, when it was in standard, Rights decks didn't necessarily have to go until turn 5, 6, 7. The majority of the boost that Cryptolith Right deck got was on turn 3 and turn 4. This is turn 2 and 3 if you play it on curve, but obviously you could always play Song on turn 3, 4, 5, whatever. And it would still be relatively effective. Obviously it's more effective the more creatures you have out. You could play this on turn 4, 5, and then the next turn, use all your dudes to tap and cast, a huge guy like a Zakama or something like that. It's another application for it. So there's just a ton of stuff you could do with this, whether you're running a relatively low curve and a bunch of creatures just to explode onto board on turn 4 or turn 3, excuse me. Or you could play it later in the game to just ramp into huge guys. And note, too, that if you played it on turn 4 and you've already got a board full of creatures, then you've still got a ton of mana to play with because of Song. So there's so much cool stuff about this card and a few different ways you could build around it that I wouldn't be surprised if it showed up in Standard. I haven't seen too much talk about it, to be honest, but I am enamored. I'm intrigued by this thing. We're going to try to brew with it because I think there's just so many cool things, and it's not necessarily restrictive. There's at least 3 easy ways to brew around this that immediately jump to mind. So I like a lot about Song, and I think that it's got a chance. That's all I'm going to say. We'll move on to Gia's Protector here. This is 4 mana for a 4/2 Elemental Warrior that must be blocked if able. Yawn. I don't get it, right? It's a 4 mana, 4 power creature for limited, but it's going to die, and it's probably going to trade with like their 2-drop. So I think it's a trap. I think it's a trap. Up next is Llanowar Scout. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/3 elf scout with tap. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. It's one of these. That's pretty good, Decks like Tron and stuff have always traditionally liked cards like this. They don't play much like this now, but I doubt that they'll play this. But in Standard, there's cool stuff. This is essentially a mana ramper in the relatively early game for a couple of turns that puts any land card from your hand onto the battlefield, which may be really, really relevant in a few ways. And if nothing else, it's an elf, which will count when we see this next card that we're going to talk about. So we need some elves in Standard, and there's actually some, there's a few already, not just in this set, but in Standard at large. So I think an elf deck is possible, but if we need 2-drops for it, this is probably going to go in the slot. Up next is Marwyn the Nurturer. I am pretty excited about this thing. It's 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 1/1 legendary elf druid, and whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, Marwyn gets a +1/+1 counter, and you can tap to add an amount of green equal to Marwyn's power. So, Priest of Titania, that was pretty sweet, for 3 mana instead of 2, which does downgrade how good the card is. You can't have 4 out at the same time because it's a legendary, so not as good as Priest. But it's still awesome in Standard, right? It's probably a decent commander for what it's worth, too. There are other elf commanders, obviously, but this is pretty dope, in my opinion. And it's great when you follow it up with a Rishkar. I would say that's probably a good turn sequence there, too. Because obviously you'll get multiple counters on Marwyn, and you can tap her for a bunch. Rishkar pays for itself. So I think that that's a cool curve. But there's also, obviously, Llanowar Elves. We just saw a 2-mana elf. Servant of the Conduits in Standard. It's an elf. There's a ton of stuff you can play before Marwyn and after Marwyn, for that matter. And another cool one, by the way, if you go through the list of elves in Standard, is Cultivator of Blades. Seems pretty decent, because you can play Cultivator for relatively early, easily on turn 4. But possibly even on turn 3. Turn 1 Llanowar Elves into turn 2 Marwyn, turn 3 Cultivator. So that seems like a pretty good, turn sequence right there too. I love Marwyn. I expect it to actually be real and do stuff in Standard. I know it's only a 1/1, and that is probably the only thing keeping anyone from playing this card is because, it can be shocked, magma sprayed, walking ballista, all the stuff I mentioned that kills Llanowar elves can kill this, and you just lost a bunch of mana value. Much more than you would so if you were just losing a Llanowar elves. You're losing 2 more in mana value. So it is a little bit dangerous, and it doesn't do much else until the turn after it comes into play. Unless you can manage a bunch of elves the same turn it enters the battlefield. So, there's a little bit of risk-reward here, but I think that the reward will be high enough for a dedicated elves deck, especially maybe a set or 2 down the line. After core set comes out, just like I said with goblins, we'll get goblins in core set. I'm sure we'll get elves in core set too. So the elves deck may be poised for something later on down the line, but I do think that there is an argument for an elves deck right this second, especially with Song of Freyalise. We just looked at that. Marwyn's another good card for that deck. So I'm into it. Definitely like the card a lot. But we're going to move on, because I kind of talked about that one for a while, but I really like it. We're going to move on to Ancient Animus. This is 2 mana, it's 1 and a green for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control if it's legendary. Hey, look at that, the thing we just looked at. Then it fights target creature an opponent controls. An instant speed fight is really, really sweet. I kind of like that. So I think it has a chance definitely seeing play in Limited. But these fight effects, even an instant speed for 2 mana, I don't quite think are good enough for Standard when we have so many better options in other colors. So unless it's a sideboard piece or something, I really doubt we'll see a bunch of play with this outside of budget decks maybe. I mean, if all you're playing is green, it might be a pretty good option, especially if you're playing a bunch of legendaries in green, which there are. So, maybe I'm misjudging it here, and it will see some amount of play, but it's going to be if it's your only option in a given deck, and that deck is really good. And I'm not seeing that. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I know some people love these fight cards, and this is a better looking one than usual. But I think it's a little bit restrictive too, and there's probably better options. There's probably better options for removal in Standard, which is what we'll always say about fight cards until the end of time. But we'll move on to Spore Crown Thallid. Love this guy. He's 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 fungus, and each other creature you control that's a fungus or a sapperling gets +1/+1. Love it. So, Fungus Lord, Sapperling Lord. And the fact that it's a Sapperling Lord is probably going to be really, really relevant. I imagine that most Commander players are going to want a copy of this, or at least the ones that play Sapperling decks. And there's a lot of accomplished Commander players that have a Sapperling deck somewhere in their toolbox. So, this will slot right in, you guys. And it's going to be fun to try to build a deck that this is relevant in Standard. We don't even have a whole bunch of Sapperlings, but we have some. And we have some other fungus too, I think. So, maybe. Like along with, we go turn 2 this, and then turn 3 Arcane Adaptation. And just go crazy on turn 4. But that's not good enough. So I love that the card exists. I think it gives a boost to Sapperling decks, and there's going to be a lot of players that love that. People love they saps, but other than that, unless you're doing the Fungusaur deck, I'm not sure how much application it actually has at this point in time. I mean, later, who knows? 2 years down the line, there's a set that's completely fungus oriented, or maybe in core set a little bit later this year, they bring back Sapperlings as more of a concept, and then this card is just way more relevant. So honestly, I'd probably go ahead and pick up a few copies of this because at some point in its life cycle, even if it takes 10 years, it's probably going to be relatively relevant somewhere. So probably worth picking up some copies. But we'll move on to Multani. Multani's still around. Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar. It's 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 0/0, but we'll get there. Elemental Avatar with Reach and Trample. And it gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land in your graveyard. Neat. And here's the awesome part. You can pay 1 and a green and return 2 lands you control to their owner's hand to return Multani from your graveyard to your hand. That is just fantastic. It's a card that, we've already seen in this Standard that recursive creatures like this are really tough to deal with and can take over the game by themselves. That's why things like, Rekindling Phoenix, Scarab God, they force exile removal. They're single-handedly why cards like Vraska's Contempt and Ixalan's Binding are popular cards in the format. And that's a double-edged sword, that point, because that could be why Multani doesn't see any plays, because those cards do see so much play. But I would counter that by saying that Scarab God still sees play, Rekindling Phoenix still sees play, despite the fact that Contempt and Binding exist, and Cast Out exists. I think Multani is still just that good looking. I know it costs 6 whole mana, but it keeps coming back. They have to deal with it with exile removal, or they'll never deal with it. It gets huge over the course of the game. There's tons of ways to abuse it, whether you're playing ramp and you have a bunch of lands out, or you're playing a deck that sacrifices a bunch of lands or doesn't mind dumping lands into its graveyard. Then you'll get a little bit of value back when you finally get to your Multani. I just love the way this looks in any deck that can ramp at all, you know, especially an Hour of Promise deck or something. This looks fantastic. There's a bunch of deserts that sacrifice in Standard. There's just so much that I think this card is significant with right now in the Standard meta. So I like it an awful lot. I might like it more than I should because it's 6 mana. But just like I said when looking at a couple of the black creatures, this is what 6 mana should look like. You know, with like this and Demon Lord Belzenlock, you know, this, if I'm spending 6 mana in Standard, this is what I want it to look like. It's a recursive creature, tough to deal with, gets enormous, has trample too, that's important, and has reach, so it deals with all manner of things. New Baneslayer, Glorybringer, Rekindling Phoenix, Aethersphere Harvester, tons and tons of stuff. So I actually like this a lot, and I think they've tried to push it towards Standard play despite its relatively high casting cost. So look out for Multani. I actually think that it's very, very real. But up next is a legend that people are actually flipping their crap over more than Multani from what I've seen. This is the ultimate Timmy bait, you guys. This is Gruun, the Lonely King. It's 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 5/5 ape warrior. It's cool that we have like a legendary ape. I don't know that we've ever had that before. But it's kicker 3, and if Gruun the Lonely King was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. And when it attacks alone, double its power and toughness until end of turn. Well, in case you're doing the math right, you can swing for 20 damage with this. So, I mean, maybe it's possible. It's the only creature that even has to be out, and you can end a game if it gets in one attack step. So maybe some sort of off-the-wall, off-beat control deck wants this. Because once it comes down, I mean, if you get it through once, you win. You know, it's their starting life total. And I'm going to get this out of the way, too. I've seen a lot of people ask how this works with Exalted. Exactly how you want it to. You know, so that should be all I have to say. But yes, this works with Exalted. But in Standard and, you know, other non-EDH formats, I really don't see it. Again, if I'm spending 6 mana, I want it to look more like Multani. I think this is just not where you want to be. You know, it's fairly easily removed. They get a whole turn to remove it before you get to attack with it. They can just chump block it. Doesn't have trample or anything like that. So I'm not a huge fan, honestly, but I know that a lot of people are. And if you want to fling it, you can always fling it. So there's things you can do with this, but nothing so relevant that I think it's going to take over Standard by any means. And there are people psyched for it, yes, and I don't think those people are wrong to be excited. I love those people. You know, I was definitely one of you. I love giant green creatures that'll just end the game in one swing, but we also have to temper our expectations about creatures like that, you know, and I don't think this is going anywhere. But I do think it's going to be a beloved card for a very long time. And it's going to be one of the more fun commanders in the set to build around, too. So that's pretty cool. All that's cool. But I'll move on to a card that I am jacked about and have seen literally. This is not on almost anybody's radar. This is Sylvan Awakening. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. I love cards like this. We used to get so many more cards like this back in the day, or at least it felt like it. We just haven't seen something like this in a good long time. And I love it, and I hope that it sees some amount of play. We're brewing it up right now. You know, you just want to put as many lands into play as you possibly can. And I'm envisioning, although it's probably not going to come to reality, I'm envisioning like a 32 land deck with this thing, you know. But again, I doubt that'll happen. But you are just trying to put, 10 lands into play as quickly as you can and swing with all of them. So I think it's really cool. Again, always a huge fan of stuff like this and excited to see it again in Standard. And it's about the cleanest version of a card like this you could ever hope to have. So I'm excited. I don't think that it's going to really do anything, but cards like this open up so much interesting like deck building space that I can't help but love them. So we're going to try and do something with it. we're going to get 100 lands out and swing for 200 indestructible haste and win the game. We're going to do it. But I'll move on to a card that everyone is excited about. At least I'm surprised, honestly, but there's been a fair amount of talk about this relatively innocuous-looking card at first glance. This is Broken Bond. It's 2 mana, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Well, first of all, Tron. Tron could want this definitely. You know, I don't know why I said that so slow. It's a fairly obvious statement. But the card is only very good in the, you know, early to mid game. And then I guess if you draw a bunch of cards, it's pretty decent in the late game too. But you'll only get that extra value off of it. You know, it's really hard to gauge this, but I would imagine that you're likely to get it anywhere between 60 and 70% of the time. But even if you don't get the extra value, it's just a sorcery speed naturalize, which is probably, this is the crux of the argument, probably worth playing in your sideboard over naturalize. Which is a tough statement. You know, instant speed means an awful lot, especially when it comes to artifacts and enchantments that have an immediate effect on the battlefield or something. You'd really rather, like something like Godfarer's Gift, for instance, you'd really rather be able to naturalize that at instant speed. But if you do get to drop a land off of this, that's a blowout in one card. Honestly, you know, they lose their thing and you get ramp. That is an insane tempo swing, because if you're ostensibly going to be destroying something they spent a turn playing, you know, so you just sort of time walk them and you get an extra land. That's going to be really hard for them to come out from behind of. So this can put opponents way behind and you way ahead. So I can really see this being a ridiculous card, but you're not going to get that kind of amazing value off of it reliably enough that it's going to be, you know, the best card in the set. And it's almost certainly just a sideboard card, but for decks that really want this effect, again, we'll go back to Tron. This could definitely be a real consideration and an important card. So I'm not going to put it past it. This could be the real deal. But we will continue to move on here with Corrosive Ooze. This is 2 mana for a 2/2, 1 and a green for a 2/2 Ooze. And whenever it blocks or becomes blocked by an equipped creature, destroy all equipment attached to that creature at the end of combat. I must be missing something here. You know, just take that, Stoneforge Mystic. I don't know. You know, like, there's just not a whole lot of equipments I can think of that are super relevant. And I hope I'm not looking dumb here, because I just don't understand that this is incredible for some kind of, you know, this just completely hoses a modern deck or something like that. But no one's playing Skull Clamp, and you know, you can't. I'm not sold on this, because I'm not sure that it just does enough. Maybe there's an incredible equipment in Standard that they're printing later on down the line. I don't see anything yet that's going to just take over Standard from this leak. So maybe this is some sort of extreme countermeasure that we'll all have to play 4 copies of in our sideboard, but it's not yet. it's certainly not yet, but I'm interested to see what comes out while this card's in Standard. Because we can't just write it off and say that it's bad. It might be extremely relevant against a specific equipment, but I don't know. I mean, I guess you get a body out of it, but I would probably just rather play a Naturalize or something. You know, I guess you could 2-for-1 with this, but I still don't. I don't know, guys. I don't think it's great. So I'm going to move on to Territorial Allosaurus. It's a dinosaur, yeah. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for 5/5, with kicker 2 and a green. It's kicker for 3. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it fights another target creature. Okay, so for 7 mana, you can kill something. Your Ravenous Chupacabra costs 7 if it's green, just so you know, and it might die. Just so you know. Just so you know. But I think this is still good enough. I like a 4 mana 5/5. I have no problems with that. It's got a relatively relevant creature type, obviously. I'm not sure it's better than Ripjaw Raptor, and I'm not sure what you want to play, like how many 4-drops you want to play. Although, I will say, I've played a bunch of dinosaur decks in my day for the channel, and the deck probably does need a couple of more relevant 4-drops. That was the cool thing about Naya and Bant dinosaurs, is that we have all these, you know, ramp pieces to help us get to a turn 3 Ripjaw. And in those colors, we could also play Ixalan's Binding and cast out. We ramp into another 4-drop. We have another 4-drop to ramp into. Just a pure dinosaur deck doesn't have a whole lot of 4-drops to ramp into, and this gives us another one. So that might actually be super relevant. And again, 4-mana 5/5s are great. Usually, I got no problem with that. You know, Llanowar Elves on turn 1, ramp into something on turn 2, ramp into this on turn 3. Great curve, as far as I'm concerned. And if you do happen to draw it late, it's good. It's really good in a mono green deck because it usually doesn't get the chance to kill creatures. So I like so much about this, and it's obviously an insane card in Limited. I mean, you pick it up in Limited every single time. So the body's crazy and it removes something. But I actually think it has a ghost of a chance in Standard because if you're playing dinosaurs, you're ramping anyway, so it's not going to be uncommon to have this 7 mana on turn 5 or 6, you know, very easily a lot of the time. And note that you can help pay this kicker cost with, you know, things that only help ramp dinosaurs into play, for instance, like a Tepic Huntmaster. You know, it'll help you get the kicker off on this a little bit cheaper. So that's all of that is gravy. I like a lot about this, you know, with things like, you know, what is it? Kinjali's Collar and Otepic Huntmaster, Drover the Mighty. It would not be uncommon to kick this into play on turn 5. So, big fan. I think that it might actually have a chance. But we're going to move on to our final green card, actually. This did not feel like it took super long. But we're going to move on to the last one here. This is Gift of Growth. It's 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant, with Kicker 2. Untap target creature, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and if you kick this spell, it gets +4/+4 until end of turn instead. This is actually, subtly, one of my favorite kicker cards in this entire set. Great combat trick in Limited, but might have a chance in Standard, especially once Blossoming Defense rotates out, which will take until the fall, but as far as pump spells in green go, I actually think this isn't terrible. 2 mana for +2/+2 at instant speed is at least okay. It's not a great deal. Again, Blossoming Defense beats it, but it's at least okay. And once you actually have the mana to kick it, it's relevant, and it's instant speed, again, you know, you can just let a creature go unblocked, or maybe even if they try to, you know, block a Llanowar Elf, or you block with your Llanowar Elf, you can kill one of their bigger guys with, you know, and surprise them. For instance, you can actually block with Llanowar Elves and then use it to help cast a Gift of Growth on itself. That's kind of cool. But I just think there's a lot of... I like the card. I like the card probably a little bit more than I should. So, you know, I'm not saying it's the best card ever, but at instant speed for a combat trick, you could do a whole lot worse. So, I like it. But I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out on the green cards, but remember, we're not done. Still got to do golden artifacts to bring it home tomorrow. So stick with the channel, sub if you're new, hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you get all that. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Check out my sponsor, TCG Player. First link in the description down there. And you can not only order booster boxes right now on pre-order of Dominaria from TCG Player for $90. That's a pretty good deal, but they've also got pre-order prices on these singles, and even if you don't plan on ordering any right now, it's kind of cool just to go through and sort of see what the barometer is right now, where people are as far as speculating on these prices. And there's some cool stuff we looked at today. You can get Marwyn for $350 on pre-order. You can get Kamal's Druidic Vow for $350 if you know how to break it. That's not a bad deal either. I actually think Marwyn for $350 is not a pretty good deal. If you're intrigued by Gruun, you can get that for $3, or the legend I like more, Multani, is $5 right now. But I think that might actually end up being good speculation. And then Song of Freyalise is $275, which again, at the end of the day, that could be good spec too. So, you know, a lot of these are actually relatively reasonable pre-order prices. So if you have interest in any of those, check out the first link in the description. That'll take you over to them. You can check it out. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or throw the channel $1 a month to help keep the lights on over at patreon.com/SBMTG. I'll let you know what decks we're doing before we do them. And I'm pretty sure that's all I got for this one. Join us tomorrow for for Artifacts and Gold, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.